they were butting on the conversation. They'd have to tell a customer, hey customer, this is Jim from Southwestern Bell. I'm on your utility pole back behind your house. Could you maybe finish up your call here in the next 5 minutes? Because it's pretty cold out here. So, but since they were butting in, they'd have to identify themselves and ask the customers to cut their call short so they could fix the problem and get down off the pole. But then the old timers above 90, they call them Buttinsky sets.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, guys. We are at Jefferson Barracks, and this is a beautiful drive out to the Telephone Museum. It is a fabulous place here with lots of history. This is a National Guard, and often very busy, as you can see here, but the Telephone Museum is up here on the left. I just wanted to show you a little bit of the National Guard. It's so peaceful back here. Beautiful green fields, lots of redbud trees, and it's a great drive out here. Only about 23 minutes outside of downtown St. Louis, and it is definitely worth the trip to the Telephone Museum because it is so excellent. Well, guys, we have finally made it to the Jefferson Barracks Telephone Museum. It is a beautiful museum here, curated by the folks that used to work for Bell Telephone, so they really know their information. I've been here several times, and every time that I come to St. Louis, I have to return because it is so marvelous and so interesting. This little museum here is out in Jefferson Barracks, about 23 minutes outside of the city, as I mentioned, and it is totally worth the drive. I am so glad I discovered this place. It is just wonderful. Now, it's a rainy day here in St. Louis, so this will be the perfect time to cozy up in a museum and learn about some telephones, and I'm really excited to show you what they have. Now, the Telephone Museum is a great museum because the admission isn't awfully expensive. It's only $5 for adults, and you're supporting this wonderful museum here, so I definitely think it's worth it. And I love off the bat the telephone curtains that they have inside the window here. How much fun. All right, guys, let's go inside.
Okay, hi, my name is Ken Shaper, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Jefferson Barracks Telephone Museum.
Thank you, Ken. And Ken is going to be taking us on a tour of the museum today. They have an excellent collection of all things phones, and a lot of the people that curate this museum worked for Bell, didn't they?
They did. They did. In fact, all but 2 of the 33 that started on to work for Bell. We have actually our oldest volunteer is 100 years old. She's a World War II Army nurse.
Oh my gosh,
and we also have another
that's
lady
amazing.
who volunteers at another museum down here as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about your newest display here, Ken?
Yeah, our newest display is right over here in front of the windows here. It's a, when we first opened, we didn't have a whole lot of cellular in here because we had a space issue. So we basically told folks, well, that's kind of like where we're at right now. At some point, we'll get some cellular in here. Well, back in early March, we went ahead and added this display here. So we have a nice assortment of cellular phones here. We have a rotary dial phone would have went back on your dash of your vehicle back in the 60s. I know they give you a hard time today about texting and driving. Well, how about making a rotary dial telephone here while you're driving? We also have some other phones here. This big old box right here actually went back in the trunk, and you can see the cord on the left side there. That cord basically went from the back trunk to the front hump of your car.
Holy cow, that is a long cord.
Yeah, no kidding. So that's a new addition. And then the two next to it, those two would have went on the hump of your car between your two front seats.
Holy cow, talk about distraction while driving.
Exactly, exactly. And then on the far right over there, that was your bag phone. And here's another closer example of the bag phone right here.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing thing to see, because phones are so pocket-sized now, and that's very
Now
heavy.
this particular phone here back in the day was actually 3 watts as opposed to 0.6 of a watt on a handheld. So this thing was 5 times more powerful than a handheld telephone back in the day.
Wow, that is just incredible.
And you were talking about the size of it. Look at the size of that battery on this phone here. The size of this battery here gives you only 60 minutes of talk time.
Only 60 minutes.
Only 60 minutes.
All of us using iPhones now are laughing at this.
Yeah, exactly. Now this is the real phone here. This is the very first handheld phone here. They call it a brick phone. It's about the size of a brick, about the weight of a brick, and it was developed by Motorola started back in 1973. They spent $100 million developing it over 10 years, and it came out on September 21st, 1983, and the cost $3,995.
That's a big expense. So who owned these brick phones?
It was generally a big business that paid for maybe their sales, their top salespeople. But they were only as good as the antenna that supported this telephone here. So if you thought you were going to go out and drive in mid-Missouri, forget it. It's probably not going to happen. But it was big business that was paying for it back in that day. But $100 million over 10 years to develop it. That's why it was $3,995.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah, but they call it the Motorola Star Tac.
Wow, what a big phone.
It is. And it's kind of weighty too. It's most of the weight is really the battery here on the back of it.
Yeah, I could imagine batteries being one of the biggest challenges to figure out with these phones.
Yep. So really cool phone there. And that was actually done by Cellular One, which is based out of Chicago, which was Southwestern Bell's wireless company back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a display here.
Yeah, so this is not a complete, this is basically what we had room for. It's a nice variety of, we got various years included here. Some of the old flip phones, Motorola flip phones right there. Some people still have flip phones.
Yes, my best friend still has a flip phone. He will not get an iPhone. He's very loyal to his flip phone.
BlackBerry, they just basically shut that company down. They were actually grandfathered, and they were still running that, and they shut that BlackBerry system down maybe about 2 months ago.
I had that little Nokia phone that's silver there. Yep. Man.
Here's a couple of my wife and I's Samsungs down here, but we had back in we got rid of them back in 2014, so they were probably probably 2006, 2007, probably Samsungs.
Man, things have certainly changed a lot.
They really have. We also got a nice assortment of trucks down here too. We had a nice generous donor here in St. Louis who collects, and he donated a lot of trucks to us, so we decided, you know what, we've got trucks, so let's put them all in one place. So we got a nice assortment of various trucks from over the years.
And what were these trucks for? Were they giveaways or things you could buy?
They would have been, well, they would have been actually, they're actually replicas of actually trucks that the phone companies used over the years. Various companies.
Wow.
Now some companies actually sold them, they put a little insert in your bill. Say if you got a bill from the phone company here for the electric company, they'd actually put an insert in the bill, and you could actually send that off and actually get one of these trucks with your company's logo put on that truck for just for, I guess, for decoration purposes, that sort of thing.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about this display right here?
This display right here used to be in front of the window. We moved it over here just basically so we'd have a space to put it, and we wanted to put all the military together right here. So this top row here, these are some different books about Jefferson Barracks. A lot of people don't realize that Jefferson Barracks dates back to 1826, so it dates back almost 200 years. They're already, believe it or not, planning the 200th anniversary of Jefferson Barracks.
That's amazing. And is this an Army base? Or?
It's a very active Army and Air National Guard base. 426 acres, and it's historic Jefferson Barracks Park.
Wow.
It was the largest base west of the Mississippi, and it actually replaced Fort Bellefontaine to the north of us in the city of St. Louis.
So interesting.
It is. So these are a variety of different field phones that they had over the years. Here's like, say, a wooden field phone. Signal Corps would have been the group that would actually have went out and actually laid the wires to get these field phones to work, to function.
And what was the purpose of these field phones?
Basically to communicate with other members of your group out there fighting in the field.
Wow, fascinating. And how rare are some of these phones?
Some of them are a little bit harder to find than others. This particular one here is kind of interesting. It actually has a light on it. It has this orange light back there. If you're going to be on the front lines, you probably don't want to have your phone ringing. It does have a volume control for your handset here to here, but that way you could cover it with a shirt, a jacket, a rag, something like that, so the front line, they wouldn't actually hear your phone ringing and drop a shell in on you.
That wouldn't be good.
No. Now the interesting thing, the bottom of this one here has 3 letters on it. Right down here on the bottom, it says MFP, moisture fungus proofed.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
Each and every one of these field phones had to have each and every component moisture fungus proof so they could be used in any and all weather related events. So like a day like today here in St. Louis, kind of a rainy day. Well, that's what it's probably like in Vietnam every day. They needed to make sure these phones could be used in any and all weather related events when they needed to be used.
Wow, that is very interesting. So if you ever find a phone, guys, with that mark, you now know what it is.
Exactly. Now this red one came from Scott Air Force Base. The donor who gave that to us probably about 3 or 4 years ago, he came in here maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. That was actually a military phone that they use. It's got the red keys on it, which is the military autovon. It's AUTOVON, all one word. That was a prioritization system. So the 3 lower keys on the bottom, P for priority, I for immediate, F for flash, could be used for high-ranking military. The flash override, the top red key there, that could be used for the president.
Oh my gosh.
Only.
Wow.
And you can see the 2 boxes underneath. Those 2 boxes underneath, the red and black box, those had to be supplied, that was supplied service from 2 different telephone companies' central offices. The red side was a secure line, which could be used by high-ranking military or the president, and the black line was unsecured line, provided service by another central office over in Belleville, Mascoutah area of Illinois.
Oh my gosh, that is so fascinating.
So they decommissioned that back in 2016, and they were bearing gifts the time they came over to visit. We get a lot of visitors from communications groups, both across here in Jefferson Barracks as well as Scott Air Force Base.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And what about some of these phones on the wall? I mean, they're absolutely massive. I've never seen
this one here was, this one here is probably the heaviest. That's actually from World War I. That's Army, Signal Corps. It's, the handset is every bit as heavy as it looks.
Wow, about how much do you think that weighs?
You know, I bet you it probably weighs 45 to 55 pounds.
Holy
I know
cow.
when we put this display up, that's the first one I went after because I knew how heavy it was and I wanted to make sure I had my energy before I got into the rest of them.
I'm sure you had to anchor that to the wall.
Exactly. So the rest of these are Navy and they're World War II. There might be a Korean mixed in here, but the rest of them are Navy ship. So on a Navy ship, these would have been deck talkers. These would sit right here on your chest. Right here in your chest. You could use them on the flight deck, but you could use them on other parts of the ship as well.
Could you strap that to yourself?
Yeah, you could actually, this would actually go around your neck and this would basically sit right here on your chest. And then you could adjust, this would actually for your hearing, and then you could adjust this basically to get it up closer to your mouth.
Interesting. And how does this phone work right here?
This phone here is the most interesting phone we actually have in here as far as the military. This was called a howler. So a howler, this particular phone here, could actually have 16 different stations. It could go to different parts of the ship. Can you imagine how noisy an engine room would be on a ship?
Very loud.
Very loud. So they call this a howler for a reason. It actually howls pretty loud when you actually crank on that Magneto there on channel 16 there.
Wow, that's amazing. Does it actually work?
It sure does. So you want me to go ahead and try it?
Yeah, let's try it. Wow, that is loud. You'd hear that for sure.
You would. You would. You wouldn't probably set your tools down. You'd probably throw your tools down and run to the phone after you heard that. Here's probably typical what you'd hear on a lot of the other phones right here would be this type of noise right here.
That has more of the bell.
Exactly. This particular phone here was the first push button, not to be confused with touch tone. Touch tone was early 60s. This was push button. This was mid 40s. This particular phone right here, when it came out, was $10,000.
Wow, and of course I'm sure the military paid for it.
Exactly, which was in turn the taxpayers. Can you imagine a Navy ship, how much rocking and rolling a Navy ship goes through with all the different, waves and things like that sort of thing. They wanted to make sure these things didn't come off the wall. So these things have to be used, you have to use 2 hands to get these things off. So you got to pull this thing over here, and then you got to lift up on that. And then basically put this back down, lock back in place. It's not going anywhere.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Same with this one right here. This one here is not coming off. I do this, I do that, go back in here, lock back in place, so it's not going anywhere.
Holy cow.
They don't want these things falling off the wall when they get hit by a 40-footer or something like that.
No, because that would knock somebody out.
Exactly. About a third of these are sound powered. So the sound pressure produced when a user talks into the transmitter generates a voltage that's sent back to the receiver, which converts it back into sound, which means if the enemy was listening nearby on a third of these, they needed no battery, no electricity, so the enemy couldn't be listening in on a third of them because the fact it was actually sound produced.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, what a collection of these phones. This is incredible.
Believe it or not, these, I'd say probably 80% of these came from one generous donor.
Wow. So most of the phones you've gotten in this museum are all from people donating?
I'd say probably 90% of the 1,500 artifacts in here were actually donated to us by generous donors. And we receive donations almost daily.
So what else is cool in this room here?
So this here's a 1951 replica of the liquid telephone that Alexander Graham Bell. So that was made by Bell Labs out of New York in 1951. It was actually a liquid telephone. You know, the whole thing with the telephone was almost a mistake, and you can actually see it. It's depicted up here in this plate right here. Alexander Graham Bell is the gentleman there on the left with the white rag in his left hand. He's got the liquid telephone right there next to the white rag. But if you look on the front edge of that table there, you see a container with a stirring stick that's dumped over, and it's spilling off the front corner of that table. That's the acidified water. So what happened was Alexander Graham Bell was actually working with this liquid telephone here, and he inadvertently knocked a container of acidified water over, spilling some of it on his pants and the rest on the floor. So he kind of frantically, in the cone there, he basically said, "Watson, come here, I want you," because he needed his help cleaning up the mess. So Watson was in the next room on this harmonic reed receiver right here, this device right there, and Watson came running in the room and says, Mr. Bell, I heard you. Well, Mr. Bell was so excited. At that point, he didn't really care that he spilt it because Thomas Watson actually confirmed he'd actually heard his message from the liquid telephone on his harmonic reed receiver.
That is such a cool story. I've never heard that before.
A lot of people don't realize that Alexander Graham Bell, he basically got involved in this because his sister and his wife were both deaf. And he also,
interesting.
Yeah, and he also paid to put a lot of deaf children through school as well.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, he was a very, very, very smart man. He was into a lot of things. He was also into aviation. So there's an airplane telephone up there that Northern Telecom had produced for Alexander back in the day.
Wow, I love these shaped telephones, and I see that you have quite a few of them over here.
They're different, aren't they? Here's the first cordless phone. These were incredibly popular. Here's the first cordless phone, Southwestern Bell cordless phone right here, from late 80s.
Wow, you can just tell the 80s colors with the plastic.
Yeah, and here's the old handset here with the pull-up. This is the accident waiting to happen here. This antenna here.
Yeah, it's getting probably bent.
Yeah, these were are broke.
Yes.
These were the very first 46, 49 megahertz. So we get a lot of baby monitors on the same frequency as these. So you got a lot of background noise, unfortunately, on these first cordless phones.
So they weren't particularly great.
They weren't. No, but they've come a long way because they're probably in the 6th or 7th generation now of cordless phones.
Now, how expensive would that be back in the day?
This would have been $115. Back in the late 80s.
Holy cow. So
yeah.
Probably not everybody had one.
No, but boy, they sold a lot of them, though. They really did, because it was probably one of the first. And people wanted to have some flexibility without having to go and run to the kitchen in their house.
And have the cord, stretched across the kitchen table.
I know when my grandma finally got one, she could not. She just loved it because she didn't have to get up to answer the phone. She could have it sitting right next to her wherever she was in the house.
Which is wonderful.
Exactly.
Now, what about these phones here? These all look a little bit more modern.
Yeah, these These phones here, I actually had a lady come in here last week and she wants one of those. So when you actually arrived today, I'm actually going upstairs through our donations, finding a big button telephone for her. Over the years, we sold a lot of those to the visually and hearing impaired. And she was in from Chicago attending a wedding, and so she asked if we had one, and I was like, well, we probably do, so let me go upstairs and look.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I'm in the process
I remember these clear phones and how exciting they were.
Yeah, this one here, we actually had one we opened. This one here was a donation maybe about a year and a half ago. They had the power cord with it. We plugged it in. It worked. It's like, well, let's put it in there and let's light it up.
Wow, it's so cool that it lights up. Man,
Yeah.
That's just exciting.
This is real Star Trek-y looking, this Celestial phone right here.
The round kind of saucer-shaped phone.
Yeah. This one's kind of unique. That's actually it's called the Contemporary there. That's completely wrapped in leather. Why? I don't know. They just did, and
I bet that was an expensive phone to buy.
Yeah, I'm not sure about what the cost on that one was, but yeah, it was through the phone company.
Was that 1970s?
Yes.
Wonderful.
And then the two next to it are actually clothing designers. They basically enticed you to buy their clothes, and then they would give you a telephone. Pierre Cardin and Jeffrey Bean.
Wow.
One of those two is collectible, and I'm not sure which one it is.
That's living the high life.
I'm telling you.
And what about this phone up here that's black?
The Wave
and white?
phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just just a different design. There's just different people with different ideas and different, likes and dislikes, and they made a piano phone similar to that as well, but that Wave phone was quite different, really.
And what was the era on it?
Probably 1980s.
Just amazing.
Yeah. There was a lot of phones were pretty popular back in the 80s. They really were. I'd say today it's probably 20 or less % of the population still is a traditional copper landline telephone.
Yes, very few people have landlines now. And what about these phones here?
So now when we first opened this display right here, we had 22 phones in here.
Wow, now you've got a lot more.
Yeah, we had a family from Chicago come down in September of 17. And they said, my mom and dad collected these phones. My mom and dad are no longer with us. We're coming down to St. Louis to visit family, and we'd like to tour the museum, and we'd like to donate some of these character phones to you. We call them character, but they call them all kinds of things. So they did the tour. After the tour, we went out to their vehicle. They donated 58 of these in their original boxes.
That is incredible.
So our display basically went up 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and we went from 22 phones to over 70.
Wow, now I do have one of the Snoopy phones.
Snoopy was pretty popular. That was actually the Snoopy, the big one, the large one in the back was actually through the phone company. The Kermit in the back was through the phone company, and the Mickey on the back right corner back there was through the phone company. They did a lot of Mickeys over the years, probably 8 or 10 of them. Some of the early Mickeys are worth a couple $1,000s.
And what are some of these Mickeys worth here?
They're probably more common, so they're probably not worth as much just because they made so many of them when they marketed them through the phone companies.
Now, when they marketed them through the phone companies, did you have to pay extra to get them?
You did, and you actually, believe it or not, you actually owned the shell, and if for any reason you wanted to stop paying, they would leave you with the shell and they would take the guts out of it, so you basically had a phone that didn't function any longer.
So I'm sure those aren't as valuable as some of the other ones.
Exactly.
Now, how do you test some of these old phones to see if they work?
Well, we believe it or not, we actually, one of our volunteers actually went through these, because these are, I'd say about a third of these are animated, which means they actually do something other than ring. They may make other noises, they may actually move and shake and dance and that sort of thing. So we actually went through them, and the ones that have animation to them, we actually recorded that on a really good quality digital camera so we could get the audio and the video on it. And what we want to do is we want to actually put that on an iPad application so that people can come in there, pick up the iPad, and okay, what does Dinosaur do? Well, Dinosaur either on a ring he rings, but on a animated mode he roars like a dinosaur.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
That's amazing. How cool is that?
So when we first opened, Grandma came in with grandson on a Wednesday. Well, 2 weeks later she came in with granddaughter, and she said, yeah, I was in here. I said, well, yeah, I walked around with you, and she said, well, grandson went home and told Grandpa about the dinosaur telephone, and Grandpa went online and spent $80 buying grandson a dinosaur telephone. Yeah, so grandson was pretty happy. So this is a nice variety here of different telephones that came out. These were the very first touch tone that came out in the early 60s.
Now, can you explain touch tone? Because I'm not sure a lot of us really know what that is.
Well, touch tone was basically electronic as opposed to the old Rotary dial that actually you turn the wheel, and it was more of a pulse type of dialing. Rotary was more electronic and basically was more, It probably was just a kind of a quicker, more up-to-date technology back in the day. Believe it or not, it was early 60s, so that's like over 50 years ago.
That's amazing. And these phones came in a variety of colors?
They did. They did. Here's some trim lines here. These trim lines here probably came in probably a dozen different colors.
I'm loving that orange and red color.
I like that. Now, why Western Electric made round keys on that orange one, or rust they call it, and they made square on this particular one over here. Why the difference? Probably manufacturing. I'm not exactly sure.
Do you think customers preferred one over the other?
They preferred colors, and that's why basically the companies charged more for the colors, because by the time these came out, it was kind of more of a moot point. Well, when the rotary dials were common, they actually did charge you $7.50 to change your color, like say from a black desk rotary phone to a blue rotary desk phone.
Wow, and the ones at the top, are those made by a different company?
Those are all these are mostly Western Electric in here, but there is a couple other stragglers in there. But Western Electric was the manufacturing arm for the Bell system. They made phones for the Bell system and only the Bell system. All the other independent telephone companies actually used a third party, and they probably had 45, 50 different suppliers that actually made telephones for the independents. But Bell system, strictly Western Electric. If Western Electric didn't make it, they had a third party make it, they put the Western Electric name on it, and they sold it just to the Bell telephone companies.
Now, how many phones do you think on average people would have in their house of these trimline phones?
Well, it all depends, but I guess the better question is how many phones did they have in their house that the phone company knew about that they were paying for? Because each extension you had in your house, you actually had to pay for. It's kind of a funny thing, but you wouldn't believe how many of these phones we get donated to us. And when we get these things, we kind of test them out. You wouldn't believe how many times we find the ringers have been disconnected, because the phone company at night could actually run a test on your line, and they could actually see how much amps it was pulling on your line and determine how many phones you actually had in your house. And if you were paying for 2 and they came up with 5 or 6, there was a problem. So what you'd probably want to do is, if the phone company, next time the phone company came out to your house, you probably want to hide some of the phones you're not paying for.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because if you
fascinating.
don't, they're gonna probably find them, and they're gonna start billing you for those.
And I'm sure a lot of people try to get away with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Phones were very expensive compared to now. I mean, they're still expensive. But,
they were.
we're
In fact, these were more expensive than the Rotary, so people were kind of slow to go to them. They were slow to go to them than the Rotary. So when they first came out in the early 60s, the customer said, you know what, I'll just stick with it because it's working just fine.
Now, were they more expensive because it was a new technology?
Exactly. And plus, too, the company could get more out of you at that time.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
Now, when they first came out, you can see this one's got a 10 button. It's missing the asterisk and pound, and there's a couple kitchen phones up here as well, the beige and the white up on the top row there. They had no need for the asterisk or pound when they first came out in the early 60s. Then they had some other long distance carriers and some other custom calling features eventually, and also then eventually banking from home, that sort of thing, where you needed to have the asterisk and pound to kind of navigate through their different systems. But initially, the 10 button was it, and then and probably within a year or so they came out with those and put those on the phone. So if you have a 10 button, it's kind of unique and collectible for sure.
And these I can see over here have the asterisk and pound.
Yes.
Very, very interesting. So these top phones were kitchen phones.
Correct.
And then these bottom phones that sat flat were more house phones.
Every little girl wanted to have one of these Princess phones. The most popular phone they ever sold was the Princess phone, both in the Rotary as well as the touchtone.
My mom had a yellow Rotary Princess phone.
Is that right? We might have one in the next room.
Very cool.
But most popular phone they ever sold here. This phone right here, just to kind of give you an example. This phone right here, it's got the leather base on it. It's got March of '71 on it. This phone here is 51 years old.
Wow.
Last
now,
month.
It's interesting that this phone has the date on the bottom, because I know with some of the Rotary phones you can take off the receiver and date them that way.
Yes. In fact, really all the phones, Western Electric have the dates on the bottom of the base, but some of them have them in other places, like you mentioned, the handset. But yeah, the couple that we have in the first room on the step, we got 2 phones in there from 1956 and 1962. But yeah, the date code was important because that kind of gave them an idea what kind of components were in that phone and as far as what kind of parts might be necessary to repair for the customer. But I mean, this phone is like 51 years old, and It's got the original leather base on it. It's like, it doesn't look like it's 51 years old.
No, it doesn't. I mean, this phone looks almost brand new.
Now this one here's got a light bulb inside of it so that you could actually light the dial up here at night, either when you made a phone call or all night long, just to kind of light up your room.
Oh, that's wonderful.
With the translucent keys. But yeah, most popular phone they ever sold.
And what about these phones down here? I see some of them are touch tone.
Yeah, these were real popular. People still have these in their homes. These, they call them 2500 desk sets. They still have them on your homes. The one on the very bottom down there, those are in governments, central offices, businesses all over the country. I'd say probably 85% of these phones in here probably still work because Western Electric made phones to last.
Yep, unlike now where they purposely
Exactly.
slow your phone down so you have to get
I always
a new
joke,
one.
you could probably drop this thing on the ground and probably drag it from behind a car, and yeah, the case might be broken, but I almost promise you, you're probably going to get dial tone on it. That's just how reliable they were. This phone here was pretty credible here. This is real popular. Americans went over to Sweden. It's made by Ericsson. It's called the Eric phone. And it's also called the Cobra phone.
It really does look like a cobra snake.
It does. So as soon as I picked it up, I gave myself dial tone. As soon as I sit it back down, I kill the dial tone. So the Americans loved using these over in Sweden, so then they were able to sell the patent rights to an American company called North Lake Electric out of Galion, Ohio, and market these on American telephone systems.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So a lot of people haven't seen these, but you can see the variety of strange colors up there.
I kind of like the red, but my favorite I think would be that green that you just showed.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Now, how much were these?
You know, that's a good question because they were not that readily available and throughout the various phone companies. So I'm not exactly sure what they were.
So that's probably a more rare model compared to some of the other ones.
Yeah, it was not a typical model that you would see marketed through the phone company. Like say this Noteworthy up here, people had those in their kitchen. You got the chalkboard, you got the corkboard. You could then slide your phone book in the side of it and basically put it away. But those were part of the Design Line series phones where you could actually finally buy your phones outright and stop renting your phones. Because you had to rent your phones up until the 70s, until the Design Line series came out, which is really a lot of these phones.
That is interesting.
That brown one back there is called the Donut phone or Sculptura phone. The one right in front of it is called the Genie phone. Yeah.
That is very cool.
These were made by Western Electric, did not make these, but they had a third party called American Telecommunications make them. They put the Western Electric name on them. They put them in the phone company's hands and said, hey, you want a Candlestick phone? Here's a replica of a Candlestick phone from the 1970s.
Wow, those are very 70s looking, particularly with that bicentennial colors.
Yes. You can went in a Radio Shack and bought one of these French style phones here, take it home, plug it in, call the phone company on Monday saying, I'm done renting my phone. Please come pick up your phone at your convenience.
Wow, so people probably liked buying the phones outright instead of renting them.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we have an example over on the counter over here. We have an example where a mom and dad rented 3 phones for $21.09 a month. That's $253 a year over the course of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Her mom and dad on 3 telephones, their rental charge was over $6,000.
Wow, that's incredible.
And they had to turn the phones back in when they were done paying their rental fees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I'm all into advertising, so I think this little display here is fascinating.
That there is my favorite. We had 2 telephone companies here in St. Louis back in the 1900s. Kinlock was an independent telephone company located down at 10th and Locust, downtown St. Louis. We also had Ma Bell Telephone Company of Missouri, which was Southwestern Bell Telephone. So we had basically 2 companies. So I came in here one day and it's like, okay, so who's the wise guy that put your shoe shine brush here on the fireplace mantle here? So that's an advertising gimmick. It's basically a gimme. You come in and buy some of my products, I'll give you a little gimmick to shine your shoes.
And they did that back in the day with thousands of
Exactly. Now look
at
the third line on it. This gentleman here was a smart businessman, because if you weren't a smart businessman, you probably weren't a businessman for very long. So he had to have 2 telephones, one with Bell Telephone Company and one with Kinlock Telephone Company.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating.
So if you were a Bell Telephone customer of his, you'd call him on a Bell Telephone Company, remember, which was Sydney 138. But if you were a Kinlock like me, I'd have to call him on his Kinlock, which is Victor 406.
Wow, now that is a marketing genius.
Exactly,
right there.
exactly. Because if he only could take care of half his business, he probably wouldn't still be in business.
Now, how hard is it to find some of these original double flange signs?
Some of them are definitely collectible. They really are. Some of them are harder to come by. You can kind of see the condition, but that Kinlock up there is just about the absolute beauty in my eyes.
Yeah,
it might not look like it in most people's eyes, but I'm telling you, it's collectible as far as collectors go, because it was an independent telephone company here in St. Louis from 1900 to about 1923.
And you know, we're all into the rusty, crusty, and
Absolutely,
dusty here, so
absolutely.
we love that.
Southwest Missouri, that came from Cape Girardeau. They were in business from about probably 1900 to 1951, and then Bell bought them. Southwestern Bell bought them, shut them down, and then moved everybody over from the Southeast Missouri Telephone Company network over to the Bell Telephone Network.
Oh, that's fascinating. My grandparents lived in Cape Girardeau,
Is that right?
Missouri. Yep.
Here's a public telephone from Germany. Here's Hawaii. Top left is Puerto Rico.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking here at the switchboard, and man,
This here's a
looks
presidential
fascinating.
switchboard. So generally speaking, probably in the headquarters cities around the country, where there was a headquarters in the city, like St. Louis was the headquarters for Southwestern Bell Telephone. This particular POTUS switchboard, President of the United States switchboard, was actually pulled out of our downtown headquarters building, which was Southwestern Bell Telephone, 1010 Pine Street. So this one here has got the military Autovan on it. We went over military Autovan in the last room. This has got the military Autovan on it. It basically gives the operator some other prioritization. So she could basically get the president's telephone calls expedited just by touching that flash override key as many times as she needed to free up the telephone lines.
Wow.
It actually served those 4 presidents. So they basically moved this from our headquarters building downtown to the Chase Park, to the Mayfair Hotel downtown St. Louis, or the Chase Park Plaza Hotel outside of Forest Park.
Wow, this is just incredible.
As long as the president was at that hotel, the operator around the clock stayed with that switchboard, and then as soon as he got back in his motorcade, went into the airport, they would pack this thing up, go back to 1010 Pine, the headquarters building, and that's where it would sit.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, did every city have something like this?
Probably just the headquarters cities. And Southwestern Bell was headquartered for Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, and Texas. They were headquartered in downtown St. Louis.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Now the one up above you here is called a Village Switchboard. That was actually a mom and pop type telephone company down in Southern Illinois. So mom and pop had 3 daughters, and unfortunately for the 3 daughters, they were responsible, each of them, for one of these Village Switchboards. So these Village Switchboards would have been in your house.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and you can see up there on the top up there, that top board, they got 25 lines and they got 4 spares. That operator could actually handle 8 calls at any given time because she's basically got 8 pins up here. Unfortunately for this poor lady here, she was the nighttime call operator, so she had to answer the phone throughout the night whenever someone called.
Stay up all night.
Yeah. Well, whenever the phone rang, she'd have to get out of bed. So whenever the phone would ring, the little door here would flip down. She'd get up out of bed. She'd say, Popper Camp Telephone Company. This is Joanne. She said, well, hi, Joanne. How you doing? This is Betty. She said, well, Betty, I was doing pretty good till you woke me up. You realize it's 1:30 in the morning? She said, I'm sorry. She said, I was wondering if Harold was home. She said, well, now you and I both know that Harold is generally not home at 1:30 in the morning. But let's, for the fun of it, let's just go ahead and see if Harold is home. She goes ahead and plugs in the Harold there. If Harold is home, they're going to go ahead and have their telephone conversation. So a lot of people say to Joanne, go back to sleep. Not for 2 reasons. The number 1 reason is she wanted to, she basically had to get up again after the phone call was ended. Number 2 reason she didn't go back to bed is she wanted to hear what they were talking about at 1:30 in the morning.
Because at 1:30 in the morning, that's going to be a pretty interesting conversation.
Exactly. So at the end of the call then, she'd crank the Magneto on the side there. You can see a little crank on the side. She'd crank it on the side. She'd get back to Joanne. She said, this is Betty, this is Joanne. I'm done talking to Harold. She said, good night. I'll see you tomorrow at church. She'd go ahead and unplug Harold here, and then she'd go ahead and close up on Betty up there.
Oh, wow.
They were not chartered, which means they were not licensed. So when another company came along, basically like a home telephone company or CenturyLink, they basically put that family out of business. They were only doing it for mostly family and some friends, and they literally ran the wires from tree to tree to tree because they didn't have trucks to put utility poles in the ground.
That does not sound very safe.
No, but that's how they did it in rural areas too. We get to the first room, I'll repeat that story. This came out of South St. Louis. This came out of Prospect Central Office, which I think was down on Grand. It was a private business. And here was their telephone number. It was 772, which was the Prospect Central Office. And you can see next to it, it says 3200, 3201, 3202, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this was called a Pbx Switchboard. So it was a private business exchange switchboard. So it was actually had a switchboard operator that worked for the company, and this was actually at that business. So when someone called in, a customer called in and say, hey, I want to talk to Bill, she could go ahead and plug in the Bill here, and they could then have their conversation. It's almost like they were like extensions, basically, is what those were.
Very interesting.
We're actually in the process of actually wiring this up. We've got probably a number of hours into this. We're going to light this thing up, and we're going to allow people to actually pull this cord out here. You know, go ahead and touch here, go ahead and plug in up here, and light this light up here.
Oh, that is so cool.
So,
I do follow a lady online that collects telephones, and she has a working switchboard in her house. And
very
all
interesting.
Kinds of phones. It's fascinating.
Yeah, very interesting, especially when you hook it up with phones, which you can do. This here is called a calculograph. A calculograph. So basically it started out in a pool hall playing billiards back in, say, probably early 1900s. Left lever was my start time. That was my card there. She'd write my name on it. I'd stick the card up here. She said, when you're done playing pool, Ken, come up and see me. About an hour later, I got done playing. Stick the card back in, right lever down. That was my end time. She said, you played about an hour. You're going to owe me about $6. Well, now the Bell system got a hold of the idea and said, you know what? We can use this for timing for our long-distance switchboard operators for billing purposes for your long-distance phone calls.
Wow.
So each one of these operators here had one of these calculographs to the right of them there that it's shown in that picture, and they would actually use that to bill the customer for their long-distance phone calls.
That is so interesting.
And they basically
I've never heard of something like that.
Yeah, they basically would take that card. They would then put the end time. They'd fill out that card, and they would take it somewhere on the floor there, where the operators were in the central office, and then they would basically take it up with the shoot up to the billing department, and then once a month they would send out a bill for your local phone calls and also for your long-distance phone calls.
Wow.
How about Laugh-In? Anybody remember Laugh-In? Oh, Lily Tomlin?
Oh man, she is great.
One ringy dingy, two ringy dingy.
And there she is.
And then she would say, hey, is this the party to whom I'm speaking? And you remember how she laughed?
Oh, she's got quite the laugh.
Yeah. She's probably mid-80s now, and she's still doing great and looks great.
Oh, she is. I love her in that show on Netflix.
Here's the first form of 911 service. It dates back to 1852, not the age of the box, but the service. It was a telegraph service. It was either installed on a utility pole or on a cast iron pedestal attached to the sidewalk. You'd go up, walk up, open the door up, lift the phone up. It was hardwired directly to the fire department nearest your house. Where's your emergency? Fire department say 2719 Cordless Drive. Yeah, we can see the smoke. We'll be right there. So they had them in all different neighborhoods all around the cities, all around the country.
So you would use that instead of picking up the phone to call them?
Yeah, because in most cases people didn't have a phone.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they didn't have a phone, so they had to go to the nearest one of these boxes, either a blue police box or a red fire box, and actually, but yeah, most people didn't have a phone.
That seems like that might take a while if there's not one nearby.
Yeah, exactly. But this, this dates back to 1852, the service.
Wow, that is amazing.
And it went from that phone to the fire department, and that's as far as it would go.
Wow, so yeah, you couldn't cheat and make any other call.
No, exactly. Yeah, it was just basically almost like a direct line, like from Commissioner Gordon to Batman. You know what I'm saying? So here's a section of utility pole right here. This is kind of interesting. This here is called a Pulp Rod. So first thing the employee would do that's going to climb that pole is they would take a Pulp Rod or a screwdriver. That length, they'd come back here about 2 inches on the ground on an angle. They'd then go into the pole. If that pole prod goes into the pole, that means that pole is rotted, and that means they're not climbing the pole.
Oh yeah, you don't want to fall off of the pole.
No. You don't even want to fall down with the pole either.
So can you tell us a little bit about the insulators on the top of the pole?
Yeah, the insulators basically they basically just needed to extend the wire from utility pole to utility pole, and they basically found that glass was a good item to use. Railroad companies used them, electric companies used them, telephone companies used them. Some of them can basically, but basically it's for extending the wire from utility pole to utility pole to utility pole. Some have will accommodate one wire, some will accommodate two wires.
Very interesting.
Here's a couple of different examples right here. This one right here, the idea is basically get the water off of here, come down here, go onto this lip here, get down to one of the drip points, and then as soon as it hits these drip points, no matter where it's at, it immediately drops to the ground. The sooner the water gets off of these, the better.
Yeah, you don't want water with the wires.
No, exactly. These were the two main colors of insulators right here, glass colors. This, some people call it blue. I mean, I think it's kind of green, but it's like, I can see both.
I would say almost aqua.
Yeah, exactly, and then the clear.
Now, did they have some porcelain insulators?
They did. In fact, some porcelain ones here. Here's some porcelain, here's a porcelain one here. And there's also some porcelain ones up here as well, on the very top up here.
Now, what was the purpose of the porcelain one?
You know what? It was just different. It was just different uses for different companies. So they basically, and up on the top up there in the middle there, that black one, that's actually made out of rubber. So it just all depends on how they were being used by the end user. Some didn't necessarily require glass. Some people were looking for a particular look. In the first room, we actually have, believe it or not, we actually have some purple or sun amethyst colored insulators. Those actually came from they were actually pre-World War I.
Wow.
We can go to them now and come back here, or however you want to do it.
That's very
You want to take a look at them real fast?
Yeah, let's take a look at those.
Since that way they'll all be together. Here's your sun amethyst or purple ones here. Those started out as clear. So back pre-World War I, they used an ingredient called manganese. Manganese was a decolorizer. It was used to control the colorization of the sand that was used to make the glass. What they didn't realize is that one ingredient, manganese, over a period of a couple decades, the sunlight or UV rays would actually change the color of that clear insulator from clear to sun amethyst or purple color. That was not the desired intent of the manufacturer of that insulator, so after World War I, they stopped using manganese. So if they poured a clear batch, it stayed clear. If they poured a green batch, it stayed green.
Now, I've heard of people actually trying to fake this purple color.
They do. They stain them, they paint them. A trained eye can actually tell the difference, but if you don't have a trained eye, you're probably going to fall for it, and you're going to probably, somebody's going to take advantage of you and make a lot of money on you.
I know insulators are quite collectible, and depending on what one you have, they can be worth some money. They
can be, yes. In fact, that's unfortunately, when I say unfortunately, it's our #1 donated item to our museum. When I say unfortunately, it's because we get a lot of them. That pen right there, it's a pen and a mechanical pencil right there with the silver tips on it. That was for the ladies that had a dialing job so that they wouldn't ruin their fingernails.
So you could put that into the phone itself?
Yeah, it actually fit perfectly. The pen fit perfectly so they could actually use the pen to dial with and save their fingernails.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. And then of course you could write with it as well.
Exactly. But yeah. Now, when these first came out, the Princess phones here, they had no ringers inside and they had no weight. So the problem that people had was that they were literally pulling them off the counter because they had no weight. So then they went ahead, they put some weight in them, and then they basically put the ringer inside also. But here's an external ringer back here on these Princess phones, back in the back back there.
So it had a separate ringer.
Yeah, because they just didn't have room for it when it first came out. They just didn't have quite figured out exactly how to put something so small in that little compartment.
Now, what about these little tiny Princess phones?
Those keychains, basically you paid your bill, the phone company would actually give you one of those little keychains. Those came out probably back in the 60s and 70s, and they would give them, we get a lot of them donated to us, and it's probably our #1 selling item in the gift shop.
And so all of the ones in the gift shop are original?
Correct, yep.
That is amazing.
Yep, and the pink ones are more expensive because they were really, the phones themselves were actually more expensive too because they were really a collectible color, the pink Princess phones.
Just amazing. Now, what about some of these phones down at the bottom?
This is the very first phone that you could buy outright and stop ringing your telephone right here. And they give you 3 different fronts to it. They give you a grass cloth, which is here. They give you a silver front. And they also give you a clear front if people wanted to put a piece of their wallpaper, a piece of their, maybe their drapes or their couch material, whatever, just to kind of have the phone kind of fit into that room that they were using the phone in. A couple of these phones down here, these are made by GT Automatic Electric. They call them the Starlight. They were made in direct competition to the Princess phones. Well, these look more like a Volvo with the square corners on it as opposed to the nice rounded corners on the Princess phones. Not even close in my eyes.
Yeah, the Princess phones are just fantastic.
Yeah, right next to that yellow Princess phone there, you got a Gorham silver plate. People would actually have that in, like, say, in their really nice, exquisite living room.
And I'm sure those were way more expensive than just your average telephone.
Yeah, and people, I'd say 99 times out of 100, people think it's gaudy. As you know what, every once in a while I have a lady come in and she said, I just think it's beautiful. And I'll look her in the eyes and said, now, are you serious or are you just playing with me?
Well,
she said, no, I think it's pretty.
Really pretty.
Yeah, I mean, but it was a Gorham silver plate is what it was. These phones here came out after World War II, these 500 sets down here. And these were basically to show the customer what the other colors look like. Because like I mentioned before, by default, you got one of these black phones right here. And if you wanted to change the colors, they're going to charge you $7.50 to change the color.
Wow, which was probably very expensive.
Well, this is late 40s, 50s, and 60s. Because these came out in 1946, the kitchen wall phones here came out in 1946 also. So all the men and women coming back from World War II were trying to get their homes established. So they basically had to basically revamp And I'll show you when we get to the next room, I'll show you which ones these replaced. But yeah, what people didn't realize is on these phones here, if you got that black phone, I'd take your black phone out to the truck. I'd take the cover off of it and I said, your gut's right here. Well, I'd go ahead and pull the kit down, rip the kit open, the plastic. I put the new pink cover on it, new pink handset cord on it, new pink handset on it. What Mrs. Smith didn't realize is she got her original phones back. She actually got her original guts back, and all she got was a new pink cover, handset, and a handset cord.
Oh my gosh.
$7.50.
Wow, crazy.
A lot of money back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, but if you had the money to have a colored phone, well,
Yeah.
you were something.
Yeah, but people love those Princess phones. They actually had 300 name submissions for that name, and they came up and decided on the word Princess, and it had the motto, it's little, it's lovely, it lights, because you could actually light the dial on it at night, either to make just a phone call or to light it up all night.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, but very, very, very collectible. And still, we still, believe it or not, we still get these donated to us, we still put them in a gift shop, and we still sell them.
Yeah, Princess
We sell the
phones
light
are
bulbs
great.
for them. We sell the light kits for them. We still, you know, people are still crazy about these things. They really are.
Incredible.
Yeah, even if you don't have traditional landline service for your rotary dial phones, you can buy a little converter box and actually make it work off of digital. Like say if you have, like say UVerse digital, which is fiber optic.
That's
So
amazing.
you can still be using. Some people even wire these things up to work in conjunction with their cell phones. But they had to come out with something on a mass production because there was so much need for getting phones in people's homes after the war, and that's when they came out with the 500s. Look at the different parts here. This is the number of parts here for the 500 set right there. Isn't that amazing?
Wow, that is a lot of tiny screws.
Yeah, no kidding.
Holy cow. I mean, you had to be an expert to be able to work on
Yeah, and if they, for some reason, the phone company couldn't actually get it working, when he left that house that day, you were going to have a phone that was working. That phone then would go back to Western Electric. It would get back on the assembly line. It would get repaired, recalibrated, and it would then go back in the phone company's hands. It would then go back into somebody's house
Wow.
at some point. So, but
That's
bottom line is
amazing.
when he left, that's why people rent it. When he left, the reliability, you were going to have a phone that was working.
Look at this little kit right here.
That's pretty interesting. That's like a first aid type of a kit.
Wow, I didn't even know that they made those.
And look at the box next to it. That's all the different bandages and things like that sort of thing. That bottle of greenies is pretty interesting. A guy I volunteer with downtown at we have an employee store downtown in our headquarters building. He said, "Hey, you have a bottle of greenies for your museum?" I said, "We do not." But the greenies, if you went into work one day and maybe you just kind of woke up and you weren't feeling so well, boy, those greenies, they probably had some caffeine in them, and they had some of this in it, and they had some of that in there. You took a couple of those greenies, you felt like a different person. Yeah. Those are chest sets, or the other nickname they got were called butt sets. Well, because you remember party lines, right? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, of course.
So more
party
times than not, I'd climb a utility pole and I'd clip on a pair of copper here. And more times than not, if you weren't on your phone, your party line was, because you had anywhere from 2 all the way up to 16 party line out in rural areas. So I'd clip on a pair of wires, and I was butting in on a conversation, so they gave these nicknames butt sets.
That's funny, and that's what these are here?
Yeah, those are all like rotaries there, except for that orange one up there. That's touch tone, but the black ones up there, those are from the 30s.
So what do some of the other people call this set here?
They call this, what's a test set, but they really call it a butt set. You know, some people say, well, it kind of dangles on their tool belt here close to their butts. Like, no. They were butting on the conversation. They'd have to tell a customer, "Hey, customer, this is Jim from Southwestern Bell. I'm on your utility pole back behind your house. Could you maybe finish up your call here in the next 5 minutes? Because it's pretty cold out here." So, but since they were butting in, they'd have to identify themselves and ask the customers to cut their call short so they could fix the problem and get down off the pole. But then the old timers above 90, they call them Buttinsky sets.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So what is this right here, sir?
That's a three-slot pay telephone, because it's got the 3 slots up on the top that go into different slots, the coins.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
So here's basically a chute from a pay station in the last room. But basically, when you see it here, you'll see it looks eerily similar to the one that this one here has in it.
That is really interesting. How did they collect the money out of these?
Well, now see, each and every one of these here had an individually serialized lock and key. So the coin collector would actually get sent out with a set of keys. He might have about 70 stops, and we actually had the keys in the last room right up above that Busch Stadium payphone. So he'd have maybe about 70 stops, and each and every one of these had individually serialized like lock and key. They'd literally pull this whole box out here. That whole box comes out, an empty box goes in. That phone might have two coins in it, or might be filled full all the way up to the top. But basically, when they take that thing out, this opening right here will actually close completely all the way and slam shut and lock, and that seal basically keeps his hands out of the coins.
That is so interesting.
That thing could hold up to $180 worth of cash. This chute right here is actually from a pay station from 1909, which is in the first room here. But you can see here, here's the guts for right here. These guts right here are on the inside of this right here. So here's your quarter right here. So this is basically, the operator basically said, you got a hold of the operator and said, I want to make a long distance call. She said it's going to cost you $1.60 for the first 3 minutes. Pretty distinct.
Wow.
Here's the dime. It's going to go in the center slot. Ding, ding, bottom and the top of the bell. What do you think the nickel's going to do? Single ding, bottom of the bell.
Wow, that is really cool.
So they used this from 1909 up to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They used it that many years because it worked just fine. And you can see, like I said, this is 1909, this is 60s, 70s, and 80s. The exact same thing for the quarter, the nickel, and the dime.
Wow, well, you know, if it isn't broke, there's no need to fix it.
Exactly. Once you put your $1.60 in, she connected the call for you. 30 seconds to go on a call, she'd chime back in and say, remember me, Bernice, the operator? I need for you to deposit more money or your call's going to end in 30 seconds.
Wow.
But sometimes she got hung up on another call, so now you're talking on the phone company's nickel. Not your fault, her fault. So they're called wall Magneto phones. Now the magnetos inside these up here, like here, basically look like this right here. They look like that right there, but they sound like this when you crank on them. So that's before you had battery in the central office. You actually had it in your house and you cranked on that. By cranking on that, what you're doing is you're generating electrical signal. That signal is being sent down a telephone line to the operator. The operator could be in a central office, if it's a Bell system, or she could be in her house, like that one we talked about, that village switchboard. And she'd have to get up out of bed, depending on what time of the day or night it was. But yeah, that's how you got a hold of the operator. Once you got a hold of the operator, then that's when these batteries here would take over. This is a liquid battery here. So there's a shelf in here for one of them, and there's another shelf in here for the other one right here. So this takes two of these batteries here. They have water and ammonium chloride in them. The reason it needs two of them is because the function of that battery, those two batteries do, it conveys my voice down the telephone line from my house to your house. The reason it needs two of them is because over a course of a 35, 40-minute phone call, my speech will start to slur. I know it's time to end my phone call because I'm about ready to drop my phone call.
So do they have to replace the batteries?
No, but the chemicals got replaced about every 9 or 10 months. And the reason the company put them in these is because they didn't want you dropping them on the floor, breaking and getting chemicals all over yourself or all over your other stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure they were very toxic.
Yeah, exactly. So about every 9 or 10 months, they'd replace the batteries. Replace the water and ammonium chloride. They then replaced them with these dry cell batteries here. These are 1.5 volt dry cell batteries. The same as your 1.5 volt AA batteries, AAA batteries. We have 1.5 volts that are 5 feet tall and probably 2 feet diameter in our central offices for battery backup. Now, these things should probably last you about 5 or 6 months. Now, if I was just out of your house about a month and a half ago, I'm going to get a little suspicious because I just got a request to come out to your house to replace your dry cell batteries. Very first thing I'm going to do when I get to your house is I'm going to look in your driveway. If you got a car in your driveway, I'm going to put 2 and 2 together and say, this is interesting. They got a car in their driveway. I wonder if they're using their dry cell batteries in their car.
Oh,
because people did. Because if you wire 4 1.5 volt batteries together, you got a 6 volt car battery.
Oh, so then they could kind of cheat.
Not kind of cheat, they were cheating. Because the old car batteries are 6 volts, the new ones are 12 volts. But yeah, people would run those until they run dead. They call the phone company and say, can you come replace my batteries? All right. We're not going to accuse you of using them in your car, but these are supposed to be used for your telephone service, so please don't use them in your car.
That's very interesting. Were they just cheaper than the car batteries, so that's why people did them? Yeah, they're cheaper because they were given to you, the phone company was given to you for free for a part of your local telephone service. They weren't charging you for them, it was just part of your deal with your monthly billing. And so did you talk through this piece here and then lift up the receiver there?
Yes, that is correct. You speak into the transmitter here and then listen there on the receiver right there. Yeah, these are called stick phones or candlestick phones. Those actually replaced the wooden wall phones.
So the wooden wall phones were first, and then you had the candlestick phones.
Correct. Now, every one of these candlesticks in here, with the exception of these two right down here. So remember the phones we talked about, the 500 sets in the last room?
Yes.
These are the Lucy phones. So these were pre-World War II. So the reason they call them a Lucy phone is because the Western Electric 302 model was the phone that you saw in the I Love Lucy episodes.
Oh my gosh, that's
Honest to
amazing.
God. And this one here actually had a metal housing, which they had also in that show. So they had one like this. You can see the two ears on the cradle there where the handset is hung up. You can see where there's silver, there's silver showing. That's because that had a metal housing to it.
Very interesting.
But they literally had to put that phone on hold because that metal housing had to be used for war-related materials.
Yep.
So then about a year later, they came out with that farmed or thermoplastic. That's an 80-year-old professionally restored Lucy phone in pecan red color.
Beautiful. And then these are very interesting. What are these here?
This will actually hold a pencil right there, sort of thing. This here was it's the only candlestick phone that we know of that actually has a dial on a candlestick as opposed to on the base like the one next to it. This was actually invented by a funeral undertaker from Kansas City. So you're saying, what is a funeral undertaker doing in the phone business? Well, the story goes is you had a family member that died. You called the operator at the phone company. The operator said, hi, this is Margaret. Margaret, yeah, I had a family member that died. She said, I'm sorry for her loss. She said, how can I help you? Well, I need to plan a funeral. She said, well, we have two funeral operators in this town. One is Almond Stroger, and one is my husband, the operator's husband. She's supposed to give half the business to him, half the business to her husband. Slowly but surely, she's taking his business and giving more to her husband. Finally, when his best friend died, his best friend's visitation was at the telephone operator's husband's funeral business. Oh. Last straw for Almond. Almond called the phone company and went crazy, and the phone company said, well, that's just your opinion, Almond. No, my opinion is fact. I don't even need my phone anymore, so why don't you just come take my phone out because my phone's not ringing because your employee is giving all my business to her husband. So what he did with making this phone here is he put one of those phones in everybody's hands that he ran across on a daily basis. He also gave you his business card with his direct dial telephone number on it. So he said, in the future, if you need to make funeral arrangements, use the phone I'm giving you today, use my business card, and use my switch behind you, and call me directly, and don't go through that nasty woman down at the phone company. So he invented that first. He invented that step switch behind you first in 1888. So here's the step switch here. That's a call selector here. We're having some issues with this thing here just recently, so it's not functioning, it's not ringing, but basically you can kind of get the gist of it here. So I'm going to dial from my house, I'm going to go through my central office, go to your central office, and then go to your house. So I'm going to dial a 4 here, which you're going to see something happen down here. 2 is going to do nothing here. 8 is going to step up here 8 times. And now 0 is the ringtone, which is going to go to your house. See, and it's supposed to ring your phone, but unfortunately it's not, something is not working right.
But that is fascinating.
Yeah, basically I picked it up. So then the entire time of your phone call, these are out of service, but as soon as you see me hang this up here, you'll see these close out, making them available for another phone call.
Wow, that is just amazing.
This hush phone here is an illegal attachment. When I say illegal, you rented your phones up until the 70s when the Design Line series phones came out. That was illegally bolted to one of Bell Telephone's candlestick phones. It basically allowed you to have a private conversation. So they say the two of us went out for lunch and you had a real estate transaction with the business you work for that you couldn't let me in on. You could actually went right up to that opening right there. You could have a private conversation with it.
That is amazing.
So AT&T sued the company, but not before they made $125,000 of them and sold them for $10 a piece back in 1921.
Wow, so they probably made a killing on those phones.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Now, how rare is that particular phone?
Not really. I've seen people selling the Hushaphone part for $275, and they didn't get any buyers. So not when they made $125,000 100 years ago. You know what I'm saying? There's probably still a few out there. You just don't see them very often. These have been used in railway installations, these scissor phones right there. That thing will pull out to where you're at right now, all the way out to you. You can talk in to say, Little Rock train's coming to the station, get your bags out on the platform, push it back up, pivot it up against the wall, get it out of the way.
Wow, that is amazing. And there's another example of it up there.
Yeah, and look at this example here. Look at this. That one doesn't pull out so far.
Wow. Wow.
But that second one you looked at had a headset on it, which was kind of interesting.
These are all very fascinating.
So now the thing we're wearing these masks for, back in the day they had something called tuberculosis and diphtheria. Well, you still heard about tuberculosis. So that clear glass mouthpiece and that white porcelain mouthpiece in the center there, at the end of the day, the operator could actually unscrew it from her phone because she had somebody sitting at her desk when she went to break or went to lunch, and it was talking this close into the mouthpiece.
Oh wow, so they would change them out.
At the end of the day, she could actually take this thing and unscrew it, and then take that glass or that porcelain mouthpiece, take it home, boil it in hot water, kill the germs, come back the next day with a clean mouthpiece. Just like the people today were asymptomatic, back in the day, they weren't sure if they were carrying tuberculosis or diphtheria. They just had no idea. But when the operator went to break or went to lunch, she had somebody sitting at her desk that she didn't know whether they had were carrying or not. So just to keep it clean, she could every night take it home and boil it.
That is interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
How cool.
Here's a pretty badly tarnished brass phone right here. Not so bad on that one. That's got a little bit of shine to it. But believe it or not, back in the day, since you rented these phones, the customer was not going to take any time cleaning the phones. So they called the phone company and would complain about the fact that it tarnished so badly. Well, your silverware tarnishes too, and so does brass and copper and all kinds of things. So basically the phone company said, well, give us your phone back and we'll take care of that problem. What'd they do? They painted them black.
They just painted them black.
Yeah, so we got a couple brass ones here that didn't get painted black, but you can actually see this one here. You can actually see where it's actually, it was brass at one time and they just painted it black.
That is a very cheap fix.
Yeah, really.
For a problem.
Pretty sad too, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. But the customer didn't know the difference probably.
No. But it didn't, they definitely didn't have to worry about. Same with that light back there. See that light back behind that red phone there, that Lucy phone? If the phone company came in your house and saw that light attached to the base of your Lucy phone, since you rented your phone, you were not allowed to modify your phone. If they seen it bolted to your base, it just allowed you to make a phone call at night without having to get up off your lazy butt and turn a light on or turn a lamp on to make a phone call at night. If he seen it on your phone, he'd take a screwdriver out, take the light out to his truck, you just lost your light.
Wow.
It's just that simple.
That is bananas.
They went to Grandma and said, hey, Grandma, your farmhouse phone here is getting a little bit antiquated. Grandma said, you need to get off my property because I'm pretty attached to my phone. So Western Electric said, okay, so what are we going to do about Grandma here? Because Grandma is very attached. So what do? They modified Grandma's telephone. So they took the Magneto out of the top here. They left the crank on here because why take it off? Because when it's closed, you don't see it's missing. They put a more modern phone or subset box up here, ringer box. When I say more modern, that's from the 60s, so that's 50 plus years old. They got rid of Grandma's friend at the central office and they replaced her with a piece of mechanical equipment called the switch. She was an operator, so now Grandma has to open this thing up here and make the call herself on this rotary dial phone here, and then she closes this here, speaks into the transmitter, and then listens on the receiver.
Wow.
This one here was modified for Bell System use, St. Louis, Missouri, August of 1970. So that was modified 51 and a half years ago, and it'll still work today.
That is incredible.
Yeah, so Grandma's pretty happy she could still be using her phone today.
So you were just telling me that they actually had more telephone wires than electric?
In 1916.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
people, we take a lot of stuff for granted here nowadays. We really do.
We really do. Look at all those telephone wires.
And the wires in the middle were electric. So about every 7 or 8 years, a telephone lineman would get electrocuted, climbing through the electric in the middle there to get up to the telephone at the top.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy.
Yeah. Now they've since obviously replaced that because electric is the very highest. You got cable up there. In some cases, you got telephone, but in a lot of cases, you don't have telephone. Yeah. So this basically took the place of this.
That is amazing.
So this is basically, so I went from above ground here to underground, like say with this trunk cable or subscriber line here.
Much safer.
Yeah. 8,400 pieces of copper right here.
Wow, I'm sure people are trying to get that copper a while ago.
Well, when it's buried in the ground, it's like good luck.
The top phone, you said that's a Lucy phone?
This is like a kitchen Lucy phone. So that's equivalent of like say the desk phone down here of Lucy. So this would have been like say, that would have been the equivalent of the desk phone that came out late 30s, early 40s.
And then this phone here is really interesting because it's not as large.
This is for, it's called the Space Saver. So this is for incoming calls only, 1930s, maybe on the side of a desk, on the side of a bar, back at a loading dock.
Interesting.
And then they put the dial on it so you can make outgoing calls. This probably started as a desk phone. He made a slight modification to the cover so they could also use it as a wall phone, like this installation here. This phone here looks like the bottom of the Batmobile, so the front of the Batmobile, so gives this nickname the Bat phone.
It's very Art Deco in its design.
Yeah, those are both Stromberg Carlson. This one here's a beehive telephone. Kind of looks like a beehive. It's a Magneto phone because it has no dial on it. So that's how I got a hold of the operator. And it's basically incoming calls only for a business.
That is so interesting.
And here's another interesting, this is how they ran wires out in rural areas, from tree to tree to tree. That crossarm edge, which you typically see on top of utility poles, cut down in size. And that's actually bolted to a cedar tree behind it. So that was actually how they ran wires in rural areas.
Wow, out in the country.
Yeah, in other rural areas, they would actually run them on the fence posts along the road, you know, from one farmer's to the next. Whatever it took, that's what they did.
So this is called a gossip chair?
Yes, a gossip bench, yeah. And a lady actually came in here and said, my mom had one in the hallway of her house, and she said, it's now in my basement, and she said, my mom has passed. She said, it's in my basement, I'd love to get rid of it. She drove up the next day from wherever she was from, and she popped her trunk and said, here's your gossip bench.
Wow, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
people could sit on this in their hall and just gossip away on
Yeah,
the
now
phone.
most of them are wooden, but this one here is not, and look how retro it is. And
It is.
We literally
Look.
went from her trunk of her car to the floor with it. We didn't even take it into the area where we take donations.
Wow,
There was
that
really
is
no need to,
amazing.
really.
It's so incredible.
Yeah.
And you were telling me something about how they actually got these twisted loops in the phone cords.
Yeah,
I think
you wanna-
that's interesting.
Yeah, you want to come over here? And,
Yeah.
This is where it, so this was right here. So they basically, they took the cord is tightly wound on this steel rod for 8 minutes, and they put it in an oven at 268 degrees, and that basically keeps the spring in the cord.
Wow.
So that when you stretch that thing out, if you're in the kitchen, you stretch that thing out to all parts of your house, the thing eventually should go back to where, but over time, after it gets used and used and used and abused, it sometimes just hangs down and doesn't recoil.
Well, I had no idea that's how those were made.
Yeah, but they actually had to wrap that tightly on a steel rod for 8 minutes at 268 degrees.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. But all the different variety of colors and stuff like that.
Well, Ken, I just want to thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
What would you like to tell my viewers about your museum, maybe when it's open, when they can visit?
The hours of operation are Wednesday through Sunday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, and that's just basically to kind of go into the same hours and days a week for some of the other museums. There's other museums down here in Jefferson Barracks Park, a couple that are run by the St. Louis County, and also we got the Midwest Civil War Museum down here, as well as the J.B. Ordnance Museum. But yeah, we'd love to have you. Love to see young people. We have a lot of different hands-on type things for young people. But absolutely love to see the young people and show them what it took, the 146 years of the telephone.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.